Right, you can see this one as well. You're going to have to turn around and look back on yourself though. It's at the top of Seal Street, just here on your left. Look back on yourself, you'll see the Blue Angel nightclub. There we are. And that's another place that the Angel, one day, very, very excited. Again, this was 1960. They turned up there because they were going for an audition. And it was an audition to try and become Billy Fiori's backing band. Now, not everyone is going to know Billy Fiori is, or was. I don't know where you're all from, like. You might never have heard of him, but you will have heard of Elvis. Everyone's heard of Elvis, of course. So, picture Elvis, but he's from Liverpool, basically. This is like a Scouse Elvis. Billy Fiori wrote his own songs, and those Elvis never did. As far as I know, I might be wrong, you know, but as far as I know, Elvis didn't write a single song. You know, Billy Fiori said he did, you know, he wrote 90% of his own songs. And they were going to try and be his backing band. Now they went for an audition, and Billy Fiori and his manager, Larry Barnes, said they're brilliant, they've got the job. On one condition, they've got to get rid of that bass player because he's not good enough. And the bass player wasn't Paul McCartney. Paul was playing rhythm guitar at the time. The bass player was John's best mate from art school and next to the moment ago, Stuart Sutcliffe. Now according to Cynthia Powell, John's girlfriend at the time and future wife, you know, she was there. She said, John said, well if he's not doing it, then none of them might. So even though they were playing for Beans on Toast at the time, it could have been Billy Fiori's backing band, John wouldn't have been kicked out of the band. Hold on. Nice, over on your right is a place known locally as the Bombed Out Church. This is the only Grade 1 listed purpose-built Victorian pub in the whole country. It's like a palace in here, folks. And the Beatles were once regulars because back in the 60s that pub became one of Liverpool's hangouts for all the musicians and the artists and the poets of Liverpool. So the Beatles, of course, were regulars, they'd be on shoulders with the rest of them. And if any of you are we getting serenaded? Behind you now, folks. Beautiful building dates back to 1967. Built for the biggest Catholic community in the country. We've got some lovely old Georgian streets coming up here. Beautiful Georgian street, this one. And John Lennon and his first wife Cynthia Powell lived at the ground floor, flat number 36 for a little while. Shared a house with a load of Norwegian sailors. Take a little look down here on your right, folks. Down street you'll see Paul McCartney and George Harrison's old school. The Liverpool Institute of College. Paul was there last week. And then you've got this building on your right, it's the old art college, and that's where John Lennon studied. Now John started at the art college there when he was 16, back in 1957. And I'll tell you something, right, and I promise you, this is completely true, right? So I went there as well, right, when I was 16, which was in 1997, right? And it was the same model for the lifestyle because John went there in 1957. He's been there since 56. Right, over on your right, you've got the 5th biggest cathedral in the world, built right next to a very early 17th century body. It's got used as a cemetery, 19th century, that's taking place next door. The cathedral itself is designed as a 2-year-old. His name was Sir Charles Gilbert. One in 4 people that I said. And that was the year they actually started building the Catholic Cathedral here, right? 1850, as early as that. Now the original one was abandoned after less than 2 years because they ran out of money. But they started again. Years later, 1933, they started again. With a whole new design and a new architect, another very famous one called Sir Edward Lutyens. And he designed this incredible Byzantine cathedral for the Catholic community of Liverpool, said to be bigger than some Greek Orthodox church. It looked a bit like that. On the left-hand side, you have got the most beautiful synagogue in the country. Next one seemed better days, mate. I'm not concerned about that. Only a bit of buddly about it though. This one on the right's even worse. Look at this one. Look at this one. This is the old Welsh Presbyterian. It used to be known as the Welsh Cathedral of Liverpool. Poor fella, they had those problems anyway. beat out the Beatles 2 weeks before recording the Love We Do as well. So I would imagine you've heard of Pete Best.
Penny Lane.
Is this a whole coach though getting off here, Carl? It is, you know. That's what we can do. Obviously some of Peter's 2Ds ones. But Colin is just going to go and check them out for special about Penny Lane. Other than the fact that the Beatles completely immortalised it. But basically, John, Paul, George and Colin, the drummer, doesn't have the same ring to it. John, Paul, George and Colin all grew up, local to this area. And at the other end of Penny Lane, you've got like the high street with all the shops and that, so it's a bit of a focal point for the area if you live around. So basically, Penny Lane was somewhere that they would meet up as young teenagers. One place in particular they used to meet up was the bus shelter. It was like a mini bus terminus, I suppose. Right at the other end of Penny Lane, they would meet up there to get the bus to their gigs around Liverpool. With the drums and everything, they didn't have a van or anything like that early on. Colin was there with his drum kit.
There's a taxi tour up there, so we'll have to wait.
We've got to wait here? No,
There's a taxi tour up there as well.
Okay.
Okay, look.
Well, it's going to be a few minutes when we wait for this one to finish. So yeah, anyway, they meet up at this bus shelter to get the bus to the gigs, as I say, around Liverpool. So they actually had this idea, the Beatles, you might not be aware of this, they had this idea they were going to do a concept album, right, which at the time wasn't a concept in itself, concept album about growing up in Liverpool. This was the plan at one time, and apparently the song Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields Forever, and In My Life, if you know that one, from Rubber Soul, one of the most beautiful songs ever written, I think. These three songs were envisioned for this album all about growing up in Liverpool. But that never happened, as I'm sure you're well aware. I think they were pressured into putting more singles out. Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields, of course, went out as singles. So that never happened. They did Sgt. Pepper's as a concept album, and inspired loads of other concept albums. But that was where the song Penny Lane originally come from. Funnily enough, John Lennon's original lyrics to In My Life were very different to the lyrics we all know today. It was all about specific places in Liverpool. One of which he mentioned in the lyric was Penny Lane, which kind of planted the seed in Paul's head, So anyway, so they'd be meeting up at this bus shelter to get the bus, the bus to their gigs around Liverpool. They didn't have a car between them, as I say. And it was the 1950s. There were not many people had cars, back then. Now, there was one person in that area who definitely had a car. And I'll show you this when we get to the bus shelter at the other end. To the left of it, there's an old bank on the corner. And the bank manager, he had a car. And it was always parked outside the bank. And years later, when they were writing the lyrics, and they were looking back, this was something that really stuck out in their minds. He always had that car outside the bank. So he become one of the characters in the song, if you remember the lyrics, On the corner is a banker with a motor car. I'm sure you remember this in the lyrics, They sing about a fireman in the song as well, a fireman with a clean machine, if you remember. He's another one of the characters in the song. That simply comes from the fact that Paul, on the way to school every day, used to go past the local fire station. And he'd see the fireman outside hosing down the fire engine in the morning. Didn't take much really to inspire him, Years later, this fella's become one of a character in a Beatles song. And if you remember, there was 4 characters in that song. I don't know how familiar you are with the lyrics, but there was 4 characters in the song. So you had the bank manager, right? You had the banker, you had the barber, the fireman, and the pretty nurse, right? 4 characters. I once heard somebody describe that song. They said it's like a little tiny play, which I think that's a brilliant way of describing that song. It is like a little tiny play. So They were all based on real people. The fireman, of course, the bank manager, the barber. The barber's name was Harry Violetti. The barber shop's still there. I'll show you that as well. You know, this was the barber. They all went to see the same fella. You see, to get their haircuts on Penny Lane. I'll tell you the one I like to talk about. Right, is the nurse in the song. The pretty nurse. I'll jog your memory on the lyrics. Right, the lyrics went. I'm going to play you this in a moment anyway. But the lyrics went. Behind the shelter in the middle of the roundabout, that's the bus shelter we use it. Behind the shelter in the middle of the roundabout, a pretty nurse is selling poppies from a tray. And though she feels as if she's in a play, she is anyway. And now, although it was Paul McCartney's song, that bit was John's, they were John's words. And I'll tell you exactly who that pretty nurse was. Her name was Beth Davies. So she was a teenage nurse cadet who used to sell poppies behind the bus shelter at the end of Penny Lane back in the 50s. Listen to this, right? One day in 1955, a very young John Lennon, right? He'd have been 14, maybe 15 at the time. He decided he was going to wander up, he was going to go and introduce himself to this pretty nurse behind the bus shelter on Penny Lane. And he had his mate with him at the time from school, right? A lad called Pete Shotton was with him. And if you look him up, by the way, Pete Shotton, he was the washboard player in the Quarrymen, right? The band that became the Beatles. Well, Pete did what John was probably planning on doing himself, and he hit it off with the pretty nurse behind the bus shelter. She didn't want to know John, but she ended up going to pictures with Pete that night. They went to the Abbey Cinema at the top of Church Road at the other end of Penny Lane, right? They ended up getting married. The washboard player off the Quarrymen and the pretty nurse from Penny Lane got married. They got divorced as well. Years later, like, married for a bit. But anyway, they all stayed in touch, you know. So John and Pete, they were very good friends, you know. They stayed in touch John's whole life, you know. Beth, the nurse, she was good friends with John's first wife, Cynthia, you know. So, it was all about real people, you know. Real people, and obviously a real place. Taking a sweet time, this one, aren't they? Tell you what. We might have to just eyeball them for a bit, so you know.
So walking to Penny Lane now. This is Penny Lane, the famous Penny Lane in Liverpool. Beatles song. Penny Lane.
Watch out for the cars, everyone.
Penny Lane. Famous Penny Lane.
Here you go, mate.